Hi, this is Anne Marie Zanzal,
And I'm Tonda McKay.
and this is our Wednesday night live at 6:30 p.m. here in Nashville, Tennessee. And we've been doing these Facebook Lives every week for about the last 2 months. And tonight we're going to talk about weathering the storm of a divorce or a breakup. So, if you are watching this on StreamYard, you have to go to StreamYard/Facebook to let them authorize you as a viewer. If you don't care whether your name is shown on this or not, that's fine. And you can just be seen as Facebook user. That is absolutely fine. I just want you to all know that this is being streamed to some secret groups like Vita Nova and Vita Nova and Coming Out and Beyond. Those are secret groups, but this is also being streamed on some of my Facebook pages that are public. So just be careful where you're commenting on if you are being seen by your name. If you would like the handout to the event, contact Barbara Linson. We have a PDF for you all. And we wanted to mention we're going to be holding 2 divorce workshops coming up in the month of June. All the information is here, and I'm putting the link there. We're having one divorce workshop about helping yourself through divorce, and then we're also having a second divorce workshop about helping your kids through divorce. So that will be coming up in June. So welcome. It's nice to have you all here. So Tonda and I, when we met each other, both of us had gone through some significant changes in our lives. First of all, I came out of a 26-year marriage. I was married to my ex-husband for 26 years. And Tonda was?
I was partnered with someone for 13 years.
But not married because
we couldn't get married.
Yeah, so marriage wasn't legal.
In Tennessee. We couldn't get married.
Yeah, marriage wasn't legal when Tonda was with her ex-partner, Meg. And so it didn't get legalized in Tennessee until 2015 when it was passed by the Supreme Court. So the whole nation had marriage equality. So Tonda went through, even though it was technically not a divorce, it was much like a divorce because it was the end of a long-term relationship and also separating in finances and all of those things.
In some ways, it was worse than a divorce because I had absolutely no legal recourse.
Mm-hmm. Because, so she had no legal recourse, and her ex-partner owned the home that they lived in. And so when they got divorced, she did not have any way to be able to be financially protected. So this talk tonight is not about the legal stuff. I actually did a great podcast with a great guest with Shannon Ori, who is a friend of mine, and she is a lawyer. It is not the last episode of the podcast Coming Out and Beyond, but it's the second to last one. And Shannon and I discuss things all divorce. So we're really talking more about it from a legal standpoint and some things to think about. A lot of times there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of times people do not try to get what they deserve because of guilt and shame. So Shannon and I talk about some of those things in the latest episode of the podcast. So if you would like to listen to that, I think it could be very helpful. So what was your breakup like, Tonda?
It was like being set on fire.
Can you say more?
I wasn't expecting it. You go through ups and downs in a relationship, but I always thought we were going to be together forever. And I had naively said, "Oh, when marriage is legal in Tennessee, we're going to get married," And so when the marriage was legalized, we went down to the Lipstick here in Nashville to celebrate with everybody, but she didn't seem very excited about it. And then 2 months later, she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm leaving you, and I've met someone." So
Yeah. So Tonda, when her long-term relationship happened, she got left. And so when my long-term relationship ended, my divorce from my ex-husband, we were together, as I said before, 25 years. I was the one that did the leaving. So there is a lot of different emotions that happen depending on if you're the one who's done the leaving versus if you've the one who's been left. And then I also know that there's people in our group where it's been pretty much mutual. You both have decided to move on as well. So the first and foremost thing that I think that we would love to give people advice on is that there's two things happening when a long-term relationship ends. Tonda's did not have, because she and Meg were not married, they didn't have the legal protection. Tonda didn't have the legal protection under the law. And because she was in a state where they do not value queer relationships, she didn't even try to fight it.
yeah,
Right. So, for example, she paid the mortgage on their house for how long?
13 years.
For 13 years. And then, but the mortgage was still in Meg's name. So she ended up, Meg ended up selling the house and not, they didn't split it in any kind of real way. She did get some money.
Well, I mean, she did. She made 200,000 and she gave me 7,000. That was good.
I guess.
She did take off the last cable bill out of that, though.
So sometimes you have to laugh.
This is
right?
truth, y'all. This is truth.
This is sometimes you just have to laugh about these things.
Yes.
But so the thing is that so those of us who are getting divorced and we have been married to a man or to a woman, we have to try as best we can is to separate the financial breakup of the business of our marriage and the emotional breakup of the business of our marriage. And what ends up happening for a lot of us, and this is from my own personal experience, is that the financial and the emotional breakup of my marriage was so intertwined, it often left me very devastated because oftentimes my ex would use the financial resources to manipulate me, and it worked. And so when we were starting our divorce, I had a hard time separating out the feelings that I was having about the divorce and the end of a long-term marriage, and also the financial piece of the divorce. So if you can, is to be able to try to remember, okay, this is about the financial part of our divorce, and this is about the emotional part of the divorce. And so a lot of times we forget that. And so if just having an attitude of, is this affecting me emotionally or is this affecting me financially? And sometimes it's both is going on. So just remember that sometimes it is about the financial stuff that makes it feel like a storm, because oftentimes people change when they're getting divorced, right?
Well, that's one thing that I was going to say is the moment that, unfortunately, I've been through a lot of breakups. The moment that you say that you're going to break up with someone or you're going to get a divorce, and I had a therapist tell me this a long time ago, that is not the same person anymore ever again to you. I know people might challenge me on that, but I guarantee you, people immediately start thinking about their own,
self-interest,
their self-interest,
which you should.
And
yeah,
why I haven't been with a man, but for any long-term amount of time, but they definitely start thinking about how much money they can not have to pay for the divorce. Women do that too, but so that's important to know, that you can't lean on that person or trust that person the way that you did if you ever say, "Oh, well, we're going to end this," and then you just expect them to be a good guy, and you just expect them to. I mean, I know that in when Anne Marie and I first started dating, I was the newcomer, and I would say things about her ex husband. I could see clearly because I was just an observer what he was trying to do, but I don't think you could at
No,
that time.
no, I couldn't. And because I was still very emotionally enmeshed with my ex-husband when we started the divorce process, which many of us are when we start the divorce process, we are still enmeshed. And
Mhm.
someone writes here to mention the feeling of rejection and acting on the woundedness. You hurt me, so I'll hurt you type of thing, which is true. A lot of times when people are hurt, they do try to intentionally hurt you. And also too is that,
Like my friend Kevin says, hurt people.
yeah, lots of people say that. But the thing is too is that um sometimes when partners are used to controlling situations, um and so this divorce all of a sudden is out of their control. They, they can't control the fact that their wife may be gay. They can't, control the fact that their wife may be bisexual. They can't control the fact that their wife may not want to move on. They can't control the fact that they may be divorcing even if they don't want to. And so sometimes people retaliate in the only way they can. And men and women do this. It's just that we are more of female predominantly group and non-binary folks that are comfortable in those spaces. And I should say woman group, that I say man, because that's usually who we are divorcing. So one of the things is that when we are going through the storm of the divorce, it feels like we're unmoored, right? It feels like everything that we thought that is true about ourselves and about our lives is changing. And in what makes it feel so uncomfortable is that our day-to-day existence, right? For those of us who have lived with somebody for a very long time, and we're used to the comings and goings of the house, we're used to how they react to things, how they behave, all those things, that day-to-day existence is changing. And so our normal starts to shift.
And not only that, but when you are with someone and maybe you fight or whatever, you're not getting along, you can hide that. You go out and you meet another couple and you act like everything's okay.
Mhm.
But when you're literally going through a divorce, it almost feels like you're naked because you go, "Oh, how's Anne Marie doing?" Well, we're not together anymore. We're getting a divorce. And so it's almost as if you have no shield whatsoever.
Right. People know that there's problems in
It's
our
like a forced vulnerability.
People know that there are problems in our carefully constructed world when we tell people we're getting divorced, right? And so a lot of times, people,
and you get tired of it. You don't want to do it all the time when you're in the middle of a divorce.
You mean talk about it?
Yeah,
you do get tired about it, and you don't want to talk about it all the time. And also too, sometimes it's also really, really hard too, is that we see our children grieving. Now, this is for those of us who've told our kids they know mom and dad are getting divorced, and we see everything happening with our children. And so many of us often feel very responsible for that because we are the one that have chosen to leave the marriage or have have realized that we need to go and live our authentic life. And so a lot of times many of us deal with a lot of guilt and shame. And so to see our kids having, struggling or being sad or having behavior and they never exhibited before, or acting out or changing is really, really hard. And so seeing that happen can make us feel like all those feelings get so much more intense of shame and guilt. And oh my God, you know, one of the things I see on our pages all the time is people write, I am blowing up my family. I'd love people to raise their hands if they've written that. Or I'm destroying my family. And what I've always said to the groups I've worked with, no, and something I learned myself because I felt like I was blowing up my family and destroying my family. No, I actually changed it. And honestly, my family now, 5, 6 years out, has in a lot of ways has changed for the better. And what I realized that there was dysfunction within my family with my kids and my husband and I, and that stuff sort of had to work it itself out, and it worked itself out in a very positive way.
You have
with
a
lot of
closer relationship with one of your children.
Yeah, I have actually a closer relationship with all of my children. And one of the things I think is the beauty of divorce, I don't know about you, but my parents, when they were still alive, I would used to call up and like some of us do this, like you'll say, hey, is dad there? Or hey, is mom there? And you just go right through the other parent, right? And so without the other parent there, our children and ourselves are forced to have much more of a one-on-one relationship with each other without it being mediated by the other spouse. Also, too, what happens, we have our cheat sheet here, is, a lot of times that change, that storm is with our family and friends, right? So what happened with you when you and Meg got divorced?
Well, I got the benefit of most of my friends, the way that it happened, they empathized with me. Now, I had an ex that I had loved for a long time, and we were friends for a long, long time. And for some reason, she couldn't see why it was hurting me so much that my ex just got up and left. And so she suddenly became really good friends. I don't know if they became more than friends or what, but so I lost that friendship that I'd had for 25 years because there were some people who just thought that it was like, oh, it was just a breakup. But after 13 years, it's not just a breakup. It is a divorce. It is a monumental shift, a seismic shift in your life. And some people I just couldn't hang around with anymore because they didn't give that the same.
Right.
You know?
And those of us who've had lesbian breakups and stuff like that, and especially if you're new to the community, a lot of times people, especially people who are not in the LGBTQ community, do not give the respect of our breakups and our divorces the same way they would a straight couple. And also, too, like a lot of people, Tonda lost standing within the community because her and Meg down in the South, her and Meg had been together 13 years, which is a long time down here because of
Because you get
a lot of microaggression here in the South being gay. And so they were together a really long time. And so she lost that status of being partnered with somebody for a long time, which was a big deal here in the South.
Well, we had several friends who were heartbroken that we broke up because they looked up to us as a model for being, they wanted what we had. And, sometimes things, even though we want them to be forever, sometimes they're not meant to be forever.
Right.
Right. And they're just not.
And so we have this really great handout here, which the lovely Barb Burlinson created, called we created together, called "Flipping the Script About Divorce." And I'd really love for you guys to grab it if you could, because this handout actually helps you sort of rethink and reframe about divorce. And so one of the things Tonda just said, things aren't forever, right? And the thing is that some of us especially those of us who've come from pretty conservative religious traditions, we're told that marriage is forever and that you can't leave a marriage and that you've made vows and you can't leave. Well, that's also something that we may need to flip the script on, because sometimes marriages aren't made to last forever, and sometimes um, the vows that were sometimes the institutions such as marriage are outdated, and that maybe I I used to believe that, like, oh, I made a vow, I'm supposed to be married forever and all those things. But now that I've gone through this, I have realized that sometimes, especially when we're really unhappy, which I was, um, we're not meant to be married forever. And it was an institution created when this was an agricultural society, and people needed to stay married forever because they needed to survive. And so I think,
and also they wanted to keep their money or
yeah,
whatever.
they wanted to keep their
still
money
the way
too. Yeah. So what I want to say is that, also to what we want to say, is that, it does feel like a storm. And those of you who have ever had any other losses in your life, I would like you to think about them, because a divorce is a grief. Whether you are the person who's initiated the divorce, whether you are the person that's been left because of the divorce, or whether it's mutual, there is a lot of grief. And so, thinking about grief as our emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual response to loss. And so, how do we cope with things like that? And how the best way to do it is to take care of ourselves emotionally, physically, intellectually, and spiritually. So we have those losses. Grief is, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual, and physical response to loss. And one of the ways we heal grief, or we integrate the grief of the loss of a marriage into our lives, is to take care of ourselves, emotionally, physically, intellectually, and spiritually. So, how do you take care of yourself? Number one thing that I cannot recommend enough is seek professional support, whether it's with a coach or with a therapist or a mutual support group found through some agency somewhere. Seek professional support, because this stuff is hard. Sometimes divorce lawyers also have support groups and things like that. But this stuff is hard. And what it's really interesting, I'm a coming out coach, and I know most of you know that. But really, the majority of my work is working with women as they get divorced. That's sort of become my other niche, because people come to see me because they're coming out. But then as we start to get to know each other and they start to move through this process, I end up doing a lot of work around divorce. And so I am here to help support you, but there's also lots of other people out there that do this work. But find some professional support.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook groups are great. And I know sometimes people can't afford anything other than that, and I understand. But if there's opportunities, if you see free support, or you're willing to pay for it, or your insurance covers it, please seek it out, because the change in the grief and the loss around divorce is significant. And sometimes we just try to go it alone too much. And I think it's really important to find help. All right, second on our list, medication.
Mediation.
She can't read that far. So we do not dismiss medication. First of all, that is something that you need to discuss with your primary care provider. But a lot of times people say, oh, I don't want to take medication. I don't need to take medication. And sometimes medication can only be for a time of our lives. And also, it also helps put a floor under all the experiences we are going through.
I mean, think of it this way. If you were, climbing in one of those little climbing gyms, they put a harness on you.
Right.
You don't walk around with that harness on all the time, but you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation. And, grief, if left unchecked, can be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
It just can.
Well, it can be, yeah. So the thing is that We don't know what kind you need to be on. We know none of those things. But if you're feeling like one of the things, like I want to share with you all that, like I was a grief counselor. It was 6 months into my process of coming out before I realized I was grieving, because my emotions were so all over the place. And that's when I realized that when I was like, I was up, I was down, I was up, I was down. When I realized that this craziness I feeling, this emotionalness that I was feeling was related to grief, it actually helped me feel, oh, I'm grieving. That's what's going on.
I want to. There's a Facebook
Comment.
user who made a comment and says, I've been going through a divorce for 4 years. Since I've been going through it so long, I've been surprised now, very close to the end, how lost I feel and lonely. And when you have been with someone for a long time, your identity is tied up with them, whether you want it to be or not. I mean, my ex's name was Meg, and they would just always call us Meg and Tonda, and even after we broke up, sometimes they would go, hey, here's Meg, here's Tonda. I mean, it was still that identity. And even more so if you're married and you share the same last name and you share children. And so, during breakups, what I've found to be really freeing is listen to different music that maybe your ex didn't like. Go and do things that maybe that you couldn't. You can redefine yourself.
Right. And that loss feeling is a really big shock. Even though it like Tonda said, I think it's the sense of identity that is leaving us. And even though, it sounds like you were in a very challenging relationship,
Mhm.
and even though you're happy that it's over, there's also a grief to the loss of something that you once had. And that is super, super normal. And it is also normal to even grieve relationships that were not the best relationships for us.
Mhm.
The further and further away I get from my marriage, I realize some things that I never realized before. And so I realized that marriage never was really good for me. In a lot of ways, it made me tamp down who I was, besides my sexuality, you all. And so I sort of lived in his shadow. And so since coming out and getting divorced and having a really supportive partner who only wants the best for me, it has changed things, and it has changed me in a way, and has made me much more like the thought of doing a Facebook Live like 10 years ago. I never would have done this. So I have become more confident in who I am. So the first thing we talked about was the emotional piece. So seek support, whether through a coach or a therapist or a mutual support group. Do not dismiss medication. Find community out there. A lot of times, like when I got divorced, my community was the other women going through divorce. So they weren't gay, but they were other women in my community going through divorce. The next thing about self-care is physical. So take care of yourself physically. I know this is going to sound redundant and like duh, but eat good. Don't drink too much. Don't get high. If you smoke pot, don't smoke pot constantly all the time. Don't take your gummies, but like the thing is like nurture your body during this time. I don't know why she's laughing. But nurture your body during this time, because if our bodies are tired and exhausted, it makes everything feel a lot more chaotic. And so Tana made a good point. We were talking about this before. Talk about your bowling metaphor.
Oh, well, if I just use this as an example, if you and whoever you're with were on a bowling team and you went bowling every Tuesday night or whatever, you don't have to give up bowling. You obviously might want to change to a different league, but you might want to take up mountain biking or knitting or something completely different, because when it's just like when you move to a different city, those of us who moved to a different city, I lived 4 years in Knoxville, and it was so great. It was like there were no memories there. There was nothing there that muddied anything up. So take that time to, I'm not saying give up bowling forever, but during the time, your grief of divorce or a breakup will not last forever. Sometimes it feels
Feels
like
like
that,
it'll last forever.
but it absolutely will not. And there are beautiful things to learn from being heartbroken. We wouldn't have any Adele songs. We wouldn't have poetry. We wouldn't have some of the most beautiful things in the world come from heartbreak.
Mhm.
And it's easy to say when you're standing on the outside of it. And a lot of times you do when you're going through a divorce, and everybody's they kind of shy away from you because they don't want,
It's like it's catching,
it's
right?
like it's, leprosy or something. You feel isolated because you're looking in, you feel like you're looking in from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, so self-care, and so then intellectual. Okay, so the later in life community, we're huge intellectualizers. We like our brains, but it's really helpful to read some good books about divorce and learning about divorce. So I'm going to ask if you have any resources that have been particularly helpful for you during your time of going through this, to put that into the chat, because it is really helpful if we can share resources around divorce. And so the last piece I wanted to talk to is the spiritual piece. So I know a lot of us are later in life and that we come from conservative religious traditions, and a lot of us often have to leave our churches or synagogues or mosques when we are coming out. And that can be really, really significant for us, and it can make us have a sense of loss that is really like it's like you feel untethered, right? Like you're not connected to something anymore. So I really believe feeding our spiritual selves is important. So I think maybe I have found a lot of comfort in meditation. I've been meditating for years, and I'm posting the name of the Insight Timer. Now, Insight Timer is a meditation app, and there's also Calm. I think there's Breathe, but
There's
Insight
millions on YouTube.
yeah, but Insight Timer is a free app, and what I loved about it is that I could actually meditate. Like I could pull up, so for example, like I like my fetal position phase when I was deciding whether to leave my marriage permanently or not. I remember I meditated every morning, and it was a letting go meditation, because I knew I had to let go to move on. And so I used that meditation, and I do believe it was very significant for me in weathering the storm of the beginning of my divorce. Now, there are other meditations on there, and I really like ones for anxiety and depression and grief, and doing the 1 or 2 minute resets and finding ones that really speak to you, because when you're having a bad day, it can almost be like an old friend, and to go and have comfort with while you are going through this time. Also too, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that another thing that could be helpful for people who journal, or if you haven't journaled before, don't necessarily just journal on your grief. Journal on what would your perfect day be with your new partner or with someone you just met. What would your perfect life be? Journal about the future, because there is a future out there.
Yeah.
You're watching what was, break apart, but that leaves room for what is to come.
Right. And actually, this flipping this script about divorce, which that we created, actually has some of those things in which, instead of saying like change is too hard for me, it's like, how can we flip that script about it? Like, yes, change is hard, but I'm pretty unstoppable, and I can do this. So there's ways to, like, when we flip our switch or flip the thinking of how we do about things, about certain things, we can end up really changing our lives. And the last thing too about spirituality is that a lot of us feel really close to ourselves in nature. So finding yourself, going for, kayaking is a lesbian sport. So get yourself a kayak and get out there on the water, hiking, all those things.
Well, in Canada, they can prescribe for you to go outside.
I don't know.
I think they're Canadians. Let me know if that's
Barb
true.
is
But
a Canadian.
but I think that it was Canada. It was some country that wasn't the United States because they don't care here. But it was some country where the doctors can actually prescribe that because you literally have a chemical change in your brain when you're outside, because we're basically made to be outside.
Yeah.
We're not made to be, in these four walls.
So that's our thoughts about divorce and weathering the storm of divorce. We're here for you. We will be having those workshops in June. Both Tonda and I will be participating in those. We understand we've been through it ourselves, and keep supporting each other. And also, too, whatever Facebook group you are in, that when you're having a really rough time, post. Let other people know. Believe me, I know that a lot of us struggle because we feel embarrassed, or we might feel shame. But the thing is, in Vita Nova and all the other groups that are out there, we understand what it's like to get divorced because most of us have gone through it. And so please post things to help yourself. And if you have questions, or the group at large is an incredibly rich resource of very smart people who have been through this, and so they get it. So we are not the only experts. There's lots of experts in the group, and so please use the group, especially if you're new on this journey. We're here for you. So if you have any questions or anything, please reach out for us. Reach out to Barb if you want the handout. And if we'll see you next week, this time next week at 6:30 Central. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.